Let's put this on. Okay, so we're going to be looking at the an interesting sugya. This is the sugya of the mitzvah of Megilah, the mitzvah of Megilah, and how it pushes off mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Also, we're going to be looking at the how it pushes off the avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. So those two things. But the main thing that we're interested in is, because it's obviously for the time being more relevant nowadays, is the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, how it pushes off Talmud Torah. What's interesting, just as an introduction to this halacha, if I would ask you, like, when it comes to the laws of reading Megilah, so what are like some of the main laws of reading the Megilah? So I doubt that you would start off with this halacha of how Megilah pushes off the study of Torah. But when the Rambam lists the laws of Megilah, so this is one of the very first laws. It's not even one of the first halachos. Within the first halacha, this halacha is mentioned. So it seems to be, like, very fascinatingly, it seems to be a real important part of the mitzvah of reading Megilah, which is like, okay, I mean, obviously, again, we see the importance of it, right? But it doesn't seem like this halacha that we stop learning Torah in order to read the Megilah would be so telling in terms of what the mitzvah of reading the Megilah is. And the reason why I say that is because when the Rambam structures his halachos for any particular mitzvah, so the earlier that he mentions any particular din, any particular law, shows how integral that particular law is to the mitzvah as a whole. So the earlier it's mentioned, the more important. So the fact that this is, I think, like maybe the second or third fact mentioned about the mitzvah of Megilah tells you that it's very integral, which is strange because, yes, of course, we should always be learning, and this case should be like the number one thing on our mind is, wait a minute, I have a mitzvah of Megilah. What about my learning, right? But like, realistically, this is not a case that most people are facing when it comes to reading the Megilah, right? Most people are not facing. Oh, the biggest, like, when can I read the Megilah? Like, do I read the Megilah at night? Can I start early in the afternoon if I want my kids to be there for the reading, right? Those are more pressing issues generally that we have in a mitzvah, not, right? So everybody sees where I'm coming from. Like, this doesn't seem to be like the most crucial, practical question that could be asked in a normal person's life about the mitzvah of reading Megilah. This is not going to be right. And again, when it comes to the mitzvah of Kriya Shema, let's say, which is a daily mitzvah twice a day, the Rambam, I don't even know if he mentions it in the laws of Kriya Shema. I don't remember if he mentions it, but it definitely is not one of the first even 10 halachos that are brought up are going to be about the mitzvah of Kriya Shema versus the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. It's not that integral. So why is it so integral when it comes to Megilah? Does everybody see just like the introduction?
Yeah, Rabbi, on that last point, is it apples to apples in that Rambam on Shema, which is Daraisa, would consider it differently in terms of how to contrast it with Talmud Torah versus Megilah, which is Darabanan? So meaning, I'm not trying to go into that concept, but right. Was your comparison apt in that regard?
Fine. So then Hanukkah candles, right? So you would want to see this as one of the first halachos when it comes to lighting Hanukkah candles. It's listed in Hanukkah candles as another derabanan, right? That is true. It's listed, but not listed in the first halacha, right? So again, you have the question, right? So even if you want to take it like a derabanan, because derabanan, so okay, so there's a really, right, apples to apples, fine. But even within other derabanans, it's not listed as one of the first mitzvos, right? And by the way, like okay, I see, I take your question, but in any case, it's not listed as one of the first ones. So which means that this, whatever we're going to learn about this halacha, means that it's more than just about this halacha. It's actually integral to the mitzvah of Megilah. So that was the first thing that struck me. Just in preparation for this year, so I went through all the shiurim I ever put together on Megilah, on Purim, because I figured, like, I probably covered like almost all important things. So like, what could I really learn about Megillah anymore? Yeah, it's a stupid ego, you know? So like, so I listed them all together, and then I'm like, okay, now I'll go through the Rambam, and I'll probably have to give like the next 10 years, shiurim on like intricacies of the writing of the Megillah, how much space to leave between, you know, and it probably won't be the most exciting shiurim. That's what I'm probably up to. And then like the third thing the Rambam writes is like this line, and I had never looked into it before. So and then I said like, okay, but it's a minor detail. But I said, if it's a minor detail, then why is the Rambam listing it first, right? If it's such a minor detail, this thing, which is what it seems to be. It seems to be a minor detail. So then why would it be mentioned so early, right? Which means it must be so. Then I started looking into it.
This whole matter, this whole question takes as an assumption that listening to the Megillah is not Talmud Torah.
Right. Excellent question. Right. Excellent question. Right. Because then it's no, it's not necessarily at all. Not necessarily. I'm not going to touch upon that, but not necessarily at all. In other words, the question then becomes, okay, it's really a question of my regular Talmud Torah. In other words, the sugya, basically, when you understand the sugya, it becomes obvious that that's not really an issue, right? But at first, that's got to be the first question that hits you, right? Is, wait a minute, why am I? It's just switching one subject of Talmud Torah for the other. We don't see like Kriyas Torah, right? When it comes to Kriyas Torah, that's Derabanan, right? So addressing, like, go back, connecting both my father and John's question, right? With Kriyas Torah, it doesn't say מבטלים Talmud Torah, לשמוע Kriyas Torah, right? It's literally almost the exact same type of mitzvah, right? You're listening to Torah being read, right? So because the answer, I think if you would ask anybody, why not? To be because that's Talmud Torah. Kriyas Torah is a mitzvah of Talmud Torah, right? You're not being a vatal Talmud Torah to listen to Kriyas Torah. So why do we use why do we use the word mevatel when it comes to Talmud Torah? Right? That's the
Rabbi, just one more clarifying question, just in your understanding or your explanation of Rambam in his ordering of halachot, you're using the word integral, not important, meaning there's something to learn beyond just the halacha itself. There's something, with more significance or depth in understanding, but not importance of halachas. Is that a way to describe what you're saying?
Yeah, because I'll tell you why I shy away from the word importance. The word importance is a
right, no,
concept. So we're not asking.
Right.
Clear out. How's the introductory shiur, John? Did you find it understandable?
Yes, but what I'm asking is what you didn't touch in that I recall, which was only 18 minutes, so I thought my recall would be pretty good, was that Rambam's ordering of his halachas was an indicator of something, like integral, important something. I didn't know how Rambam ordered things, but I didn't think it was random, but I didn't know it was, 1, then 2, then 3 was a specific order of something.
Right.
I just didn't know what it was.
Right. So importance would be touching upon philosophy. So we're shy. We always shy away from that. So I wouldn't want to make that point in shiur. In other words, because that would be a philosophical point. So I have no interest in making that. That. So when the Rambam talks about it, when I say integral, because it's integral to understanding the halacha, right? To understanding the mitzvah as a whole, right? Not to understanding the philosophy at all behind it. But okay.
But I'm saying that's all the time. Is that Rambam? Sorry, Rabbi. I'm sorry. My question, I accept that. My question is, if I'm reading Rambam, is that always the case that the ordering is based on integral?
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Got it. Interesting.
Yeah. And he's an organized, and that's the whole point of the Mishnah Torah was
of course.
Organized the way it was organizing halacha. Not in the way that Shas had organized it by topic and then going through. Okay, so let's look at the Gemara. Okay. And this is like really I think 90% of the shiur is based on just this source here, right? That this is where all the information really lasts. It says V'hashadamar Medina V'yir. Okay, so what do we learn from? We learn from two psukim from two words in a pasuk, mishpacha, right? So we learn that we stop the avodah and the Beis Hamikdash in order to read the Megilah. Okay, that's what we said. We stop the reading of the Megilah in order to we stop the avodah and the Beis Hamikdash in order to read the Megilah. Right. So the Kohanim, we picture it's Yerushalayim. The Kohanim are in the Beis Hamikdash, and they have to stop the avodah in order to do the Mikra Megilah. Okay, fine. So again, to go back to John's point, and the most important methodological point for this year is the easy thing to do is always to just say, well, that must mean that Mikra Megilah is more important than the avodah and the Beis Hamikdash, right? That's got to be the idea here. But not talking philosophically, that would be a philosophical calculation. So what we're talking about here is that's not what we're looking for. Okay, right? We're not. That's not lumdus. What we're trying to understand is the mechanics, not why does Mikra Megilah push off the avodah, but how is it pushing it off? Right? Under what mechanism is being used within the corpus of halacha for one to push off the other? Okay, so that's what we're really trying to figure out. Okay.
I have another question. Another question I have in terms of the word mevatel, whether it's limud Torah or whether it's korban, does that mean that if I'm going to be reading the Megilah, I can never recap that limud Torah or do that korban?
That's going to be Tosfos' point. Tosfos centers on that. We're going to see Tosfos that it really focuses on that. That's what Tosfos is gonna focus on. Why the word mevatel? Because it doesn't seem like we're being mevatel, but that's what Tosfos is gonna look at here. Okay, we're gonna see that in Mitzvah Hashem very soon. Okay, so the next question you have to ask is what we see here is like a push, right? We're pushing one thing off for another, right? That's what we're doing here. We're pushing one thing off for another. We're pushing off the avodah for the Megilah. Okay, so that leads to the question of what are the borders of the push? So whenever you have a push in halacha, there's two types of push. There's a push that's hutrah and dechuyua. Hutrah is that it's completely pushed, right? In other words, that now there's no mitzvah of Talmud Torah whatsoever. Or is it dechuyua, where we're pushing it just a little bit, more like a suspension than a total push off of something, right? So that's the question here. When it says that we're mevatel the avodah for the Megilah, for reading Megilah, so is this a temporary push or is this a full-fledged push? Okay. Okay. Now the next thing the next question we have is this a Talmud Torah kula question? Is this something that applies throughout all of halacha, that you'd have that this just fits nicely into whatever we'd see elsewhere in halacha, or is this halacha unique to Mikra Megilah? Does Mikra Megilah have something in it that nothing else in halacha we're ever going to run into something like this, and therefore it pushes off other mitzvos, it pushes off the avodah. Okay, and then the next two things that we have is when it comes to the mechanics and examining the mechanics of something. So you'll see a lot of people will automatically go to the technical, right? They'll go to the technical and they'll look for a previous principle that applies in halacha, and then say, okay, which principle is being used here? And that's what's happening here. We're just using a principle, and we're going to apply it here. So I think in the introductory share, I gave the example of tadir v'shena tadir kodem. That whatever comes more frequently is the one that takes precedent. That always comes first, right? So if we apply that, right, just okay, that's what we're doing. We're taking one of those things, take it from our word bank or our principle bank, apply it here, see if it fits. Chances are it does, and then we're done. That's a technical approach to understanding halacha. Nothing wrong with that. That's fine. But Lundus challenges a little more. What Lundus is looking for are the components that are used for these for like this compound. We're looking for the conceptual ideas here. Okay, and the conceptual ideas is what's going to really explain the mechanics. That's what we're looking for. So like they used to make fun of Chaim Soloveitchik. They used to call him a chemist, right? Because what he was doing was he was taking halacha and he was looking at compounds of halacha, and then he was breaking it down to its component parts, right? The component parts being the concepts, and that's what he was doing. He's breaking it down to its concepts, and people said like, okay, but that's not halacha. That's not learning halacha. But we took that, like that's what we love. This is a perfect sugya that's an example of that. right? That when we're looking at the mechanics, what we're really striving to understand are, what are the components to Mikra Megillah? What are the components to avodah? What are the concepts here, right? We're breaking this. This is our scientific phenomena. In other words, when you put Talmud Torah and Mikra Megillah in two separate test tubes, and then you pour it into one beaker, right, and together, and then like you watch the halachic explosion that takes place. So what's the reaction, the chemical reaction that takes place? The Mikra Megillah will rise to the top over everything else, right? It rises to the top over avodah, and it rises over the top of Talmud Torah, right? So now what we're asking though is, okay, but what are the specific elements that were inside Megillah and inside Talmud Torah and avodah that pushed Megillah to the top? That's our question. So and it's an analogy, but that's that's essentially what we're looking for. So we're not looking for a technicality. We're not looking for philosophy. What we're looking for is the basic elements to Mikra Megillah, avodah, and then eventually in a second we'll look at Talmud Torah, and that's what we're trying to understand. Okay, good. Okay, and we're going to come up with a theory as to how it happened, right? That's our svara, as our theory, and then we're going to test our theory to see if it works in other areas of halacha, right? That's or otherwise you're just making stuff up, right? That's your fail-safe, okay? Different lamdanim throughout time have used different, I would say, requirements of proof, right? So there's some lamdanim that don't require much proof at all. It doesn't make a difference if you can prove it or not. The fact that it makes sense is enough, okay? That's one way of looking at it. And they value creativity a lot more than I would call consistency, where you see it consistent throughout halacha. And others are very, very strict on, if you're to the point where they say that if you're just offering a svara and you don't see the consistency of it, then that's just pure narcissism. And I'm quoting somebody here, like a big London Yerushalayim, who says that it's just pure narcissism because all you're doing is just throwing out, like, okay, here's my theory. You know, and okay, but we're trying to explain God's Torah, so you should do a little more work than just, here's my theory. It's very creative, it works. Yeah, so those are different spectrums within Lamdanim. Okay, go with the Gemara goes on, right? The Gemara takes the limud from the avodah and now pushes it to Talmud Torah, and it says mikan samchu that mevatlan Talmud Torah ubal mishma mikra Megillah. Okay, that Talmud Torah now comes, right? And it says that if avodah, which is so chomer, right, uses a classic chomer case. So if avodah, which is so chomer, is mevatel, is mevutal before Mikra Megillah, so all the more so Talmud Torah should be, because that's not as strict, it's not as chomer as Talmud Torah. Okay, so first of all, we have to understand how the chomer is operating here. That it pushes Talmud Torah to push off, it pushes Megillah to push off Talmud Torah. We have to understand how is avodah chomer and Talmud Torah isn't. We're told that Talmud Torah can gulam, right? So how do we figure out that avodah was chomer and Talmud Torah was kal? That if I can push off avodah, then all the more so I should push off Talmud Torah. How do we get to that conclusion? And again, is this a hutrah dechuyua type of thing when it comes to Talmud Torah? Okay, those are our next questions. Okay, Tosfos comes along, and Tosfos says, well, shouldn't even be a question. In other words, it's not like these things take up the entire day, right? The avodah takes up like an hour in the morning. So do the avodah and then do Mikra Megillah. You have like the whole entire day to hear the Megillah. So why is this even a question, right? That's where Tosfos comes along. He says this shouldn't even be a question. So Tosfos says, no, it's not a question of whether or not you're going to fulfill both mitzvos, but Mikra Megillah should really be done with the largest possible crowd. So the Kohanim, what you're doing is you're telling the Kohanim that every Kohen should suspend or push off the avodah, and every Kohen should stop the avodah, and every Kohen should gather with the rest of Klal Yisrael to hear the Megillah, right? It wasn't like this sort of idea that they had different minyanim all over the place, right? Rather, it seems to be this one massive minyan. And the question is, should the Kohanim do the avodah or join that minyan, right? That minyan you have to assume that minyan was done at sunrise, right? Like right out there with daven, and then they hear Megillah right away, right? There's no reason to think that they were laning at 9 a.m., right? Chances are that they were doing things the way it was supposed to be done. So they were laning right away. So now the question is, do the Kohanim do the Korban Tamid, right? Or do they hear Megillah, right? So Tosfos is right. You could just say, do the Tamid and then do the Megillah. But if you do it that way, the Kohanim would miss out on the big reading. And that seems to be the issue here. Okay, so that's what it says. So now, if you would ask me, and you look up anything about Mikra Megillah, how crucial is a crowd to Mikra Megillah? You'll say it's at best a hitter, right? You would say it's best like a better way of doing the mitzvah. Barov am ha'jas melach, right? And as Tosfos says, Tfei Pesumei Nisa, that it has better Pesumei Nisa, it's better publicizing the miracle. But it doesn't seem to be that it's such a crucial part of Mikra Megillah that really what Tosfos is actually saying is that it's not mevatel Talmud Torah l'shmoa Mikra Megillah. What are we really doing? Mevatel Talmud Torah l'shmoa Mikra Megillah barov am ha'jas melach, with like the most with the biggest crowd. That's what's really happening here, right? So now you have to ask the question, like, okay, so we're talking about being mevatel the avodah for not for the mitzvah, but for the mitzvah in its most ideal way. That's very interesting, right? And then I have to examine how that's possible, right? Okay. Okay. So so then you have the Beis Yosef, right? So and the Beis Yosef sides with Tosfos. He goes on and on about how Tosfos he says the Ran and the Rambam agree with Tosfos. I didn't have to quote the whole thing because he's just going on and on saying exactly what I just said. Okay. And then he says straight out, why is it? Because Tov Kosim Atzibor Mishum at the Have Faith Pursuing Nisa. He says the whole idea here is that it's better because it's better Pursuing Nisa, right? That's the idea. So he says okay, great, fine. So we have to ask questions. How is Pursuing Nisa pushing off the avodah? Okay, the Ran comes along, and the Ran, I'm not going to go into the Ran here, we did it in the introductory share, but he says that from the Ran, you see that this is that this mitzvah is derabanan. The Mikra Megillah is derabanan. Okay, the whole big machlokes of whether it's derabanan. There are gaonim that consider a Mikra Megillah d'oraisa. Okay, we generally don't assume that way. But then you have a debate.
Rabbi, do you have a second to just discuss how it can be d'oraisa?
It's a whole
like under what category?
Because the problem is if you say straight out that it was one of 613 mitzvos in the Torah, so right, which is what the Bahag, the Baal Achas Kadosh, says. So your obvious question is, what do they say in Har Sinai when they said, okay, you're going to have to celebrate the Purim miracle, right? Everyone's crying. Well, Purim miracle hasn't happened yet. And by the way, he lists Hanukkah as well, right? So that I think after this year it becomes very obvious what his theory was. The Rambam strenuously disagrees, and he really writes a lot about why it's not. But it's going to have to be that the kiyum follows through. That the kiyum is a kiyum d'oraisa. We're going to say something similar to that here. Okay, so then there's a debate in the Rambam.
Question: according to your methodology, am I thinking now about Neros Chanukah Pursume Nisa as another item to think about in terms of putting it, a list of what I have to compare this to?
I don't know what you mean by comparing.
In other words, you're asking now. I'm going to make a list of all the mitzvos that deal with Pursume Nisa, and all those mitzvos that deal with Pursume Nisa, I can be mevatel Talmud Torah for it.
And that was one of our questions. One of our questions we have to deal with is this unique to Mikra Megillah, or is this Talmud Torah Kula type of thing? I think that's our third question. Is right? That's
what I'm saying. So am I taking all mitzvos that have Pursume Nisa are going to go into this category?
We have to see. I'm not committing yet. Right? That's right. That's one of our questions. Right? It's one of our questions here. Okay. So
you can't leave this year. He won't tell you that.
What do you say?
I said you can't leave the shear. You're not going to give the answer until the end.
Right. It's got to be in order to things, right? Okay. So our question is, so the Rambam is very cryptic in terms of what he calls it. It says, Kriyas Megillah was mana mitzvahs asay medivrei sofrim, v'advarim yiduim shehita kanas neviim. Right. So right? So he doesn't say mitzvahs asay likros Megilah, right? He doesn't say there's a positive command in the Torah to read the Megilah. So it's a sure not one of 613. That's clear. The Rambam doesn't hold it. Plus, he writes all over the place that it's not one of 613 mitzvahs. Okay, he doesn't seem to say it's min Torah. He says midivrei sofrim, right? And he says that it's but everybody knows it's from the Nevi'im. It's a takana Nevi'im. So the question is, when a Navi gets up and makes a takana, right? What power does that takana have? So this is like something we could spend. You know, there's been like thousands of pages written about the Rambam's. The Rambam has divrei sofrim, divrei Nevi'im, divrei Kabbalah, right, are three different categories that the Rambam has that are not doraisa derabanan, that are not like straight out, like easy for us to understand. So we don't really know. But we can go on forever and ever. My point is that this is clearly not just your regular derabanan, and it's clearly not one of 613 mitzvos and not one of the doraisas. But the reason why I bring this up is because the Rambam is clearly differing than the Ran, who holds us a straight derabanan, right? And so the question is, so what role does this play? Its designation as daraisa darabanan. What role does it play in terms of its importance with how do you say, with pushing off things for pushing things off from Mikra Megilah, right? So what role does its designation have? Okay, and then what is like at Takanas Nevi'im? Maybe we'll go into that a little. Okay. Now next question is like this should be a very simple question. This should be a very, very easy question that we should answer. We have a halacha that's brought up here in this Gemara that when it comes to Talmud Torah, a very simple formulation. How do you know when you stop learning for another mitzvah? If the mitzvah can be done by somebody else. If the mitzvah can be done by somebody else, then you don't push off your learning. If the mitzvah can't be done by somebody else, then you do it. A mitzvah veris, a personal mitzvah that you can only do, you can't appoint somebody to do for you, is not a question. Of course you have to do that mitzvah, right? So you do that mitzvah before you do Talmud Torah. Or else we'd never be doing any mitzvahs in our lifetimes. Right, we just always be learning. Right, it'd be obvious, right? Oh, so should I say kiddush now? No, I'm learning. Okay, so you don't say kiddush, right? So because I'm learning, right?
What about osik man mitzvah, patur min mitzvah?
Also, it's a patur.
What about osik man mitzvah, patur min mitzvah?
So that's always a shiloh when it comes to Talmud Torah, right? How does Talmud Torah and osik man mitzvah, patur min mitzvah work, right? Let's set that aside because that's always going to be a right because. Right, it comes to Tosos and Brachos about making Brachos Torah, and if Tosos assumes you're always osik with Torah, right? Let's put that aside here. But when it comes just this simple question, right? Simple question. I have a mitzvah and I'm learning. So should I do the mitzvah? So we already have a formulation that addresses that question, right? We have a Talmud Torah Kula question like that, and then we always know that if it's a mitzvah veris, then we don't do Talmud Torah. We do the mitzvah veris. So why do we even need this whole question? Right? Why do we have to have the chomer from avodah? Why do we have to have this whole Gemara that builds this up? Why do I have to have anything from this? This is not even a question. If I want to know the answer to this question, I don't look in the halachos of Mikra Megilah, right? I look in the halachos of Talmud Torah, where it states the halachos of Talmud Torah. My point is that it's very easy to say this is not a question about Megillah at all, right? We seem to be saying we're looking at this in the Seches Megillah. We're talking about the Megillah pushes off avodah. If it pushes off avodah, then it must push off Talmud Torah. But really, where should I look up this question? This is not a question about Megilah. This is a question about Talmud Torah. And in the halachos of Talmud Torah, we already have a halacha that addresses this. So what do I need this whole extra thing about this for? Right? You see that? That undercuts the whole sugya that we're learning. So why do I have to have all this? Right? That seems to not make that seems to be troubling. But I have to have this whole new limud when it comes to Megilah. Okay.
Does it matter that when a mitzvah can be done in a range of time, or no matter what, we're talking about like the first available opportunity to do a mitzvah?
So that goes back to Tosos's question, right? Tosos looked at this question and said, this question can't be one versus the other because that never happens, right? Unless you have like the slowest Megillah reader in the entire world. Right, like or you have the slowest korban giver. Like, oh my gosh, the guy that got korban today, of all days, Purim is the guy that takes the longest to offer a tamid. Right, it's going to take all day long. So then you'd be like, okay, so now we're stuck. But that doesn't happen. Right, that never happens. So this is not even. So that's why Tosfos comes along and says it can't be a question of one versus the other. It must be a question of one versus the ideal way of the other, and that's Mikra Megilah. Both of these things should be done at the earliest possible point of the day, right? The avodah should be done at the earliest part of the day, and Megilah should be done at the earliest part of the day, because then you have the largest crowd, and that's the way, and then you have more Presumei Nisa, and therefore it should be done at that time, okay? And that leads perfectly into the ritva. And this ritva is the key to the whole sugya. There are some times where you really have to work hard at understanding a sugya, and you have to and then there's sometimes the Rishonim just lay it out for you. The ritva in this sugya just lays it out for us. And essentially, what we're going to do is we're just going to work off of this ritva. This ritva really, but we have to. The problem is that if the ritva was here, we'd have to ask the ritva, how did you come up with this? That's what we have to explain, how the ritva came up with it. But that's easier work than just trying to figure out. The ritva did basically the work for us here. Okay. So look what the ritva says. So first, the ritva, you should know, mostly follows Tosfos' opinion. He came from the same school of thought as Tosfos. So the ritva says, and that's what he's going to start off with. I'll show base ready. Talmud Torah by Megilah, right? Talmud Torah pushes off Megilah. Perish. In order to read Megilah, B'tzibor, right? Because otherwise, I'll just say, okay, so I have a regular learning time with my chavrusa from 8 to 10 p.m. Megilah is supposed to be read at 8:15 p.m., so I'll just read it at 10 p.m. like later on. But then you'll be missing the tzibor, right? That's the key, okay? So again, there should really be two words after Mikra Megilah here. It should be b'tzibor or b'rovam, right? That's what it should say here. That's how Tosfos and the Ritva are understanding the sugya, that there's just one or two words missing from the end of the line. Okay, now he says, this is an interesting thing, which is for another time when we're studying more about Talmud Torah. The Mikra Megilah mitzvos averes hayom and Talmud Torah shalom machar. I can only do Megilah today. Talmud Torah I can learn tomorrow, which is a fascinating way of looking at it, because we generally don't look at Talmud Torah as I could just push off Talmud Torah because I could do that mitzvah tomorrow. It's not like giving a loan to somebody, right? Somebody comes to me for a loan. They say, do me a favor, look, it's Purim. Things are a little busy here. I'm happy to loan you the money. You have nothing to worry about. I have the money for you. I'm just going to give it to you tomorrow. Is that okay? And the person says, yes. That's not what we're doing here, right? In Talmud Torah, it's as much, I have to learn it every single day. So that's a fascinating line, but not one that we're going to get to. So just like we push off tefillah in order to do just like we push off Torah in order to daven and in order to say Kriya Shema, right? We do that. That's obvious. So too, his next line is we should do the same thing for Mikra Megilah. But watch how he says it. This is the key. He says, right? He says to mishum Presumei Nisa, right? Because of Presumei Nisa. So now he's saying the kiyum, right? The element of Mikra Megilah. What is the key element of Mikra Megilah? That's Presumei Nisa, right? So Presumei Nisa is what's going to push off Talmud Torah. Okay, fine. Now how, right? How does it push off Talmud Torah? It's very nice. You can say that all you want, but how does it do that, right? So look what he says. This is amazing. Asua k'kriya shema d'oraisa. Presumei Nisa was made to be like Kriya Shema d'oraisa. The whole question that we have about how this works is because we're saying that Mikra Megilah is either just another mitzvah, maybe it's D'Rabbanan, maybe it's a Tekanas Nevi'im, right? So how could it be that it pushes off Talmud Torah? How could it be that it pushes off the avodah? So the Ritva comes along and says, no, you're not understanding Mikra Megilah. You look at Mikra Megilah as a very weak element, right? It's as a very weak compound. But really, Mikra Megilah has a very powerful element within it, right? It has there's a component within Mikra Megilah that's actually very strong. It's a daraisa. So you say, what are you talking about? How can Mikra Megilah be daraisa? Right? He says, no, it's a suah kriya shema daraisa. It's made just like kriya shema daraisa. So now I understand what is happening, right? What is happening here according to the Ritva? The Ritva is saying, right? Keep in mind, we're not saying how, we're saying what. The Ritva is saying, this is what's happening. You have a mitzvah daraisa of Mikra Megilah, okay? And you have a mitzvah daraisa of Talmud Torah. So the mitzvah daraisa always, throughout all of Torah, the mitzvah daraisa of whatever it's going to be is going to push off Talmud Torah. You have that by Kriya Shema, you even have that by tefillah for the regular person. It pushes off Talmud Torah. So the Ritva says that's obvious. That's what's happening here. Our question then is, wait a minute, how did the Ritva do that? How did the Ritva come along and say that Mikra Megilah is a daraisa? It's not a daraisa, right? So how does the Ritva come along and just, it's a daraisa, they made it like a daraisa, right? This word, asua, right? They made it like a daraisa. Very nice, hocus pocus, and we make it like a daraisa, and then everything works out in the sugya. It works out perfectly. So how does that work? How did Mikra Megilah, which is clearly a darabanan, or maybe Takanas Nevi'im, Divrei Sofrim, how did that become a daraisa? That's our question. Okay, and then the whole sugya comes up to that question. Okay, so let's explain that, right? Let's explain this asua, okay? But now we understand what's happening. Everybody sees how we understand what's happening now. We understand that the daraisa of Mikra Megilah is pushing off Talmud Torah. Okay, if you tell me that, and you say, listen, just accept what I'm about to say, and then right, and then we're fine. Okay, as long as I don't want to understand how it works, but I understand that it works. Okay, fine, I get that.
Rabbi, that's
Yeah.
what you said. I'm not sure if you purposely are misleading us to give us the answer at the end, but it doesn't say that Megilah is daraisa. It's saying Pirsume Nisa is daraisa, right? And then it's a question of what fits into the category of Pirsume Nisa, right? It's almost like to your father's question earlier, right? So the Ritva is not saying Megilah is daraisa, is he? Or is he saying Pirsume Nisa is daraisa?
For all practical purposes, it's one and the same.
No, one's a category that something fits into, and one is.
But for our purposes, I'm saying it's if I'm trying to explain this, right? What is the Pirsume Nisa here? The Pirsume Nisa here is Mikra Megilah.
Right. No, I understand, but I'm saying from a framework standpoint, the Ritva is arguing, I think, that anything that would be in the category of Pirsume Nisa can push off a daraisa because the Pirsume Nisa is a daraisa.
So I understand. So now Mikra Megilah is a daraisa.
No, I accept. I'm just saying from a framework versus.
Yeah, but so we haven't said anything different now. So now my question is, okay, John, great, because Pirsume Nisa is daraisa. How did Pirsume Nisa, right, become a daraisa that makes Megilah push off Talmud Torah?
All right. So I'm saying though, I'm looking forward to that answer. But I'm saying, but what we're the Megilah question is subsumed under Pirsume Nisa being a daraisa.
I understand. What the Ritva has done for us is the Ritva has brought along a microscope and put it on Mikra Megilah, and then all of a sudden we're seeing something in Mikra Megilah that we didn't see before. And what is that thing? Pirsume Nisa. And now we're learning, which we didn't know before, that Pirsume Nisa is so strong that it can push off Talmud Torah. Okay, but we want to know, how does Pirsume Nisa take an obvious darabanan and give it the power of a daraisa? How does that work?
Okay. So what we're saying is that this whatever we come up with will also work for Hanukkah candles, because Hanukkah candles also has this concept of Pirsume Nisa.
It should, but I don't want to say that it would until I go through that sugya. But yeah, it should. Right? Technically, if it's one and the same, if there's no other external factors playing a role. And by the way, that is true. It is a true statement that Hanukkah candles at its right time pushes off Talmud Torah. So that is true. Now that is a fact. I just don't want to say that that's the mechanism that's happening, but it should be. As everything lines up perfectly, then it should. Okay. So this is our question. So how does it work? So here's how I want to explain it, and it's the same type of a thing that the way it works by the mitzvah of this is consistent throughout the Torah, that what you have is you have certain mitzvos that are durabanan, but they're instituted by Chazal to fulfill a mitzvah d'oraisa. Okay, I'll explain. Okay, so this is the Brisker Rav's theory when it comes to the mitzvah of a hutrah kamocha and gemilos chasadim. Okay, so the Rambam has, I should have brought it down, I didn't bring it down, but the Rambam has a strange language. He says that when it comes to there are a few acts of chesed that are mandatory. So bikur cholim is mandatory, achnasas orchim are mandatory. These are mandatory mitzvos, okay? And they're mandatory derabanan. But the Rambam, the way he writes it, he says that these are derabanan mitzvos, but they're mekayim the daraisa v'haftal erecha kamocha. In other words, most mitzvos, and I ask you, how do I fulfill the mitzvah of Mikra Megilah? You're going to tell me, read the Megillah. How do I fulfill the mitzvah of shofar? Listen to the shofar being blasted, right? How do I fulfill the mitzvah of lulav and esrog? You wave the lulav and esrog, right? Okay, very simple, right? That's how I do it. How do I fulfill the mitzvah of haftarach kamocha? There's no answer to that question, right? There's no doraisa. To fulfill the mitzvah of haftarach kamocha, you have to do the following. So Chazal instituted certain things that you must do, right? People must go visit other people that are ill. Okay, you must do that. Now, the must is the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan were the ones that instituted. But by doing that, the Rabbanan, I fulfill a daraisa, right? That's something, right? It's a completely different thing, right? I fulfill a daraisa. And that's what I'd like to say is happening here. That's what I think the Ritva is doing here. That what the Ritva is saying is Chazal came along, and there's a daraisa concept of pursuing Nisa. Wherever we have a nace that, and I don't know the boundaries of it. I don't know if it has to affect all of Klal Yisrael, some of Klal Yisrael. I don't know how big of a miracle it has to be. I don't know who has to declare it a miracle. But certain miracles, you could say it as follows: certain miracles have an obligation from the Torah of pursuing Nisa, that we have to go ahead and publicize it on a Torah level. Okay, and Chazal come along in certain places, certain times in certain places, and institute a requirement from pursuing Nisa. Right? At a pursuing Nisa, they institute that requirement. Okay, and that's what's happening here. There's pursuing Nisa. There's an obligation to publicize a miracle. A miracle happened in the Purim story. Chazal wanted us to publicize the miracle of the Purim story. So how do they go ahead and do that? By instituting the mitzvah derabanan of Megilah, of reading the Megilah, and that fulfills the daraisa pursuing Nisa. Okay. As an aside, John, that would answer your question of how could you ever think that pursuing Nisa would be a mitzvah daraisa, one of 613 mitzvos, because what you'd say is that it's not that the Rabbanan instituted it as a Rabbanan, the Rabbanan instituted it as that this is one of the mitzvos. This is how it fits into one of the mitzvos. It's still difficult, and that's why the Rambam disagrees with it, but you can understand at least how it's not so ridiculous to say such a thing. Okay.
So the technical aspect that you're talking about, if you said that Bikur Cholim is the way that we fulfill V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. So there I have a pasuk in the Torah, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. So Mikra Megilah is my way of fulfilling Pursume Nisa. But where do I have a Doraisa of Pursume Nisa?
I'm gonna push back a little in terms of how you formulate it. Bikur Cholim is not how I fulfill V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Chazal instituted Bikur Cholim because there was a need for Bikur Cholim. Right, there was a need for Bikur Cholim, and then that need for Bikur Cholim stems from the haftarach kamocha. But you don't need a pasuk. Well, even if there was no mitzvah of the haftarach kamocha, Chazal still would have instituted Bikur Cholim. It just wouldn't have stemmed from a daraisa of. It wouldn't be mekayim. Sorry, it wouldn't be mekayim a daraisa of haftarach kamocha. Maybe it would come from a lachta b'dracha. Right, but it wouldn't. It's not the way Chazal didn't sit there and say, how should a person fulfill haftarach kamocha? Let's come up with a list of actions that will require them to do, and that's how they do it. The haftarach kamocha is a principle of how we treat other people. But there was a need for Bikur Cholim, so they instituted those things, and those things fulfill the mitzvah of the haftarach kamocha.
But your father's question, even as I heard it, and you kind of changed the question, still seems applicable, which is, where does Pursume Nisa roll up into a daraisa?
That's a good question. I don't have an answer to that now. I don't know. That's a good question, right? How does where do we see that? Is a good question. I don't know. Maybe you take it from Pesach. I don't know. It's a good question. Okay. Okay. But my point is that you don't need a pasuk though, right? You don't need that pasuk like you need it for haftarach kamocha. Okay. So let's get to the answers. So we said when one mitzvah pushes off another, we don't ask why, right? But we ask what the mechanism is for the push here, right? So Megilah, right, pushes off the avodah and Talmud Torah by way of a principle of mitzvah averes, right? You have a mitzvah that's passing by, right, and that mitzvah averes on a technical level pushes off all other mitzvos. Okay, the question is when it comes to the avodah, okay, is it hutrah that it's completely pushing off the avodah, right, or is it just dechuyua, which means that it's briefly suspended, right? So whenever you're talking about a mitzvah averes, right, the assumption always is that the push should be one of dechuyua, of just a brief suspension. Okay, it could, if the circumstances are necessary, it could be a complete push, right? But it doesn't have to be. In other words, when a mitzvah averes is presented, right? So the assumption always is that it should be dechuyua. It should just be a brief suspension until you can fulfill the mitzvah that's passing by. And then you go back to the regular mitzvah. But it could be dechuyua, it could be hutrah, right? If it was necessary, okay? With mikra Megilah, right? So the assumption is that you'd have enough time to read the Megilah and then go back and fulfill the avodah and or Talmud Torah, right? But because it's a mitzvah veres, if need be, right? And which again, most of the time it won't be, but if need be, then it would be completely a complete hutrah. If you imagine like all of Bnei Yisrael oversleeps on Purim morning, right? And there's like 1 hour left to the day, right? So that would be it. So now everybody sits there and says, oh my gosh, do we do the avodah today or do we do mikra Megilah today, right? Which one? Because we've only got enough time to do one of them. So then in that case, you would say that mikra Megilah comes first, and then it would be hutrah, it would be completely pushing it off. But what we're saying here is we see clearly that it's dechuyua. Okay. Is this limited to mikra Megilah, or is this something that applies kol Torah kula? What's the principle here? Right. So on a technical level, there's nothing unique about mikra Megilah pushing off the avodah or Talmud Torah, right? But when we talk about we're going to see that there is something unique to mikra Megilah, right? What's the unique part of it? On a conceptual level, there is something very unique about mikra Megilah, okay? And that is that it's a kiyum d'oraisa of persumei nisa, right? So while most mitzvos don't have that, most mitzvos just come along, and this is why you needed the whole limud and everything about it, right? We'll get to that in a second. But because what's really unique here, what's really unique here about mikra Megilah is that it has this kiyum d'oraisa of persumei nisa, right? It has this unique component, and that's why you have this whole sugya about this to teach us that what mikra Megilah really is a kiyum d'oraisa of persumei nisa. Okay, the kal chomer, right, it's not the mechanism that sets the push into effect, right? But it just presents the obvious of one mitzvah's qualifications to be pushed off. The kal chomer is not showing so much the chomer, but it's really showing the kal. It's explaining what Talmud Torah is. Okay, and the Talmud Torah always acts, oddly enough, as the kal here. Okay, and that's more of a din in Talmud Torah, that because one is always supposed to be learning, chances are Talmud Torah is always going to act as the kal. And that, I think, is what the Ritva is hinting to when he says that mikra Megilah is overis, it could be done only today, and Talmud Torah could be done all the time. Okay, to fully explain that is a larger area. Okay. Okay, so now why do I need the kal chomer, right? Why do I need that at all? Why don't I just go to the regular halacha, right? So it shows, right? So what's it showing? It shows that it pushes off, right, that a mitzvah derabin, okay? Without the kal chomer from avodah, okay, I would have thought that my individual Torah study should be pushed off for avodah, but not Talmud Torah derabin. Let's say I'm giving a shiur. Let's say there's so many people that are like dependent on the shiur that I'm going to give. Okay, so the kal chomer tells me that even Talmud Torah derabin, right? Because I'm learning it from avodah, which is a mitzvah derabin, right? It means a mitzvah for avodah is not just one person's korban; it's the korban of the entire tzibur. That's what the korban tamid is, right? It's the korban of the entire tzibur. So now I understand that if I didn't learn this from avodah and I just used the regular mitzvah of Talmud Torah to understand this, I might have come to the conclusion that Talmud Torah, if it's an individual's learning, it's just my learning, then I stop for mikra Megilah. But if it's Talmud Torah derabim, if I'm giving a shiur for everybody, right? So then I shouldn't stop my Talmud Torah for mikra Megilah. But by the fact that I learn it from the avodah, that shows me that even if it's Talmud Torah derabim, I should stop. Okay. Okay. So now, what about this idea that it's just a hitter, right? That what am I doing? That it's just a hitter. So a hitter is when you enhance the mitzvah with the additional beauty, right? The mitzvah Megilah is a kiyum of persumei nisa, right? Which is by definition fulfilled with a larger crowd as possible, right? The larger the crowd, the larger the kiyum, right? That's the whole idea. This isn't just like an enhancement. It's not just a hitter, right? Reading Megilah with a crowd, it's not just a hitter. It's a greater kiyum of the mitzvah, right? Because the whole mitzvah is to have pirsum. Pirsum requires a crowd. So that's why it's not so odd that we're just pushing off Talmud Torah for Megilah with a crowd. right? But it's because that is the essence. The whole essence was that the fact that it was presuming Nisa. Okay, and okay, so let's see. We're just out of time here, so just see if there's any other essential things that have to be answered. 1 second here. What else do we have? Okay. Okay. Also, and how can presuming Nisa transform a rabbinic mitzvah into a mitzvah like Shema and Doraisa? Right. So that's what you're saying, that it's a kiyum Doraisa. It's a takanas derabanan, right? But with a kiyum Doraisa. So that's different than a regular derabanan. A regular derabanan is just I fulfilled a mitzvah derabanan. But when it comes to something of this nature, what's really happening is it's a takanas derabanan instituted in order to fulfill a mitzvah daraisa, and that mitzvah daraisa would be or a kiyum daraisa, I should say, which would be presuming Nisa. Okay, so just to sum up with one last minute here, and then I really have to get going. But just one last thing here to sum up that what this tells us about Megilah and why this is such a crucial halacha. Why it has to be in the beginning, because it's teaching us that Megilah is not just a derabanan like all other derabanans, which is what I would think. Right, where this is really, it's a mitzvah derabanan, but it's a mitzvah derabanan with a kiyum daraisa, right? And that's what's really happening here. I'm being mekayim the mitzvah of presuming Nisa. If I just read this and I didn't really go through this sugya, I would have thought that Megilah is a derabanan with a kiyum derabanan of presuming Nisa. If this is just the rabbis instituting that I should be mekayim presuming Nisa on a derabanan level. What this is really teaching me is that there's a kiyum daraisa here, which is why it has to come first in the halachos. Because without knowing this halacha, I would never be able to know the fact that this was really, that Megilah has a kiyum daraisa aspect to it. Okay. Purpose of math, everybody. But good shiur. Yeah, I said it was good shiur. I don't lie. Regular shiur, you'll see, I'll just write that it's just a shiur. I'm giving shiur, you know? But like good shiur. Like next year, by the way, next one, Shushan, what?
I would say I would never accuse you of lying, but you could be wrong.
I'm not. I know.
Right. No, I know you're not wrong on that.
Right.
All right. I knew you were telling the truth from your perspective, but you're also correct in your perspective.
I'm always correct in my perspective. On a good shiur. On a good shiur. I know what a good shiur is. That I know what this. The next one's also very good on Shushan Purim. The next one's really going to take you. I have a whole new understanding of Shushan Purim that I never had before. I really didn't understand Shushan Purim before. So you like that also.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Have a good Purim, everybody. Bye bye.
Thanks so much. Bye bye.